Hi, welcome to SGT University. I am Dr. Kamlesh Sharma from Faculty of Science. Today we will be learning about scientific variables.
Let's have a look on the learning goals. In this video, we are going to discuss scientific variables such as independent variable, dependent variable and controlled variable. Let's begin with the problem question which will be tested in the experiment. The problem question is, does the sunlight affect the plant growth? In this problem question, you can easily identify two variables, sunlight and plant growth. The sun intensity is the independent variable and the plant growth is dependent variable. If we predict the outcome of the experiment, the sunlight is independent variable because it can affect the growth of a plant. Whether the plant will grow faster or not depends on the sunlight. So the plant is a dependent variable because it can be affected by sunlight. The growth of the plant depends sunlight, therefore dependent variable can be affected by independent variable. In addition, independent and dependent variable has cause and effect relationship. The cause is the sun intensity, effect is the growth of the plant. Independent variable is the one that affects dependent variable, while the dependent variable is the one that can be affected by independent variable. The relationship of these two variables can be tested through experiment. In order for us to test whether the sun intensity affects the plant growth or not, we will keep all the variables the same in both setups except sunlight. Accordingly, we are going to use same species of plant with the same size, health and age, put inside the same soil and the similar pot and the same amount of water and the same schedule of watering. The variables such as plant, soil, pot and water in controlled and experimental setup are controlled variables. Controlled variables are the variables used during the experiment to ensure accuracy and reliability of the result. We use control variables to make sure that the sunlight is the only variable that can affect the plant growth. Now, let's proceed to independent variable, which is the sun intensity. To test if the sunlight really affects the plant growth, we will put the plant to the place with sunlight.
Let's make an experimental design which consists of experimental setup and control setup.
This setup with sunlight is what we called experimental setup. Experimental setup is the exact same setup as the controlled setup, but it has independent variable. So, experimental setup has independent variable which is the sunlight. In contrast, we will put the other plant with the place with no sunlight, such as inside the closed room or closed box with any place with no sunlight. This setup with the sunlight is a controlled setup. The control setup is the exact same setup as the experimental setup, but it has no independent variable. So, the only difference between these two setups is the independent variable, which is sunlight. Experimental setup has independent variable, while control setup has no independent variable. Does the independent variable is the variable that is changed in an experiment by the experimenter. It is what you do in the experiment. After setting the experiment, you will observe the effect of sunlight on the plant. What you are observing is the dependent variable. In this experiment, you are observing the plant growth. So, the plant growth is the dependent variable. The dependent variable is the change or result that occurs due to independent variable. It is what will happen in the experiment. That is, after 1 month, the result is this. The plant exposed to sunlight grows bigger, but the other plant with sunlight dies. The result shows the plant growth depends on sunlight. Let's sum up. The scientific variables are independent variable, dependent variable and control variables. The independent variable can affect dependent variable. It is the variable that is changed by experimenter. It is what you do in the experiment. The dependent variable can be affected by independent variable. It is the change or result that occurs due to the independent variable. It is what will happen in an experiment. The control variable is the same variable during the experiment to ensure accuracy and reliability of the result. The experimental setup is the exact same setup as the control setup, but it has independent variable. Control setup is exactly the same setup as experimental setup, but it has no independent variable. Let's consider one more problem for the better understanding. The problem is, the higher the temperature of water, the faster an egg will boil. Identify the dependent, independent and control variables. What would be the answer? Independent variable, the temperature of the water. Dependent variable, the time needed to cook the egg. Control variables are types of egg, stove, pots used.
How to remember which is which? In order to try and remember which is the dependent variable and which is independent variable, try putting them into a sentence which uses causes a change in. Here is an example. Saying light color causes a change in plant growth is possible. This shows that the independent variable affects the dependent variable. The inverse, however, is not true. Plant growth causes a change in light color. This is not possible. This way you will recognize which is the independent variable and which is dependent variable. Let's consider the second example. The saying is temperature of water causes cooking of the egg is possible. This shows us that the independent variable affects the dependent variable. The inverse, however, is not true. Time needed to cook the egg causes increase in temperature of the water. This is not possible. This way you will know which is the independent variable and which is the dependent variable.
Learning outcomes of this video are: you should be able to understand the difference between independent, dependent and control variables. You will be able to identify these variables when doing your practical work.
So today we covered independent, dependent and control variables. Next time we will be study about research ethics. Keep learning, keep growing. See you next time.